Hey, everybody. Welcome to the My Father Said podcast, where we talk all things faith, finance, and family. My name is Ryan, one of your hosts. I am a father and also a son.
And I am Robert Templeton. I am Ryan's dad, and I am also a father and a son.
All right, and this is our very first episode, so thank you all for being here. I am going to be interviewing the old man, my father himself. So, Dad, sir, what can you tell me about what it was like in growing up in Orangeburg? More specifically, can you tell me any formative experiences you had when it came to shaping your thoughts and ideas behind money?
Yeah, I sure can. The formative experiences are probably what a lot of people would have any idea about that we grew up in. I like to share with people at times, Ryan, that Mom and Dad, when they first got married, they were like every other couple in the 60s. They struggled to make ends meet. I think Mom and Dad got their first house in 1968, and I remember seeing a document somewhere in the house that showed the purchase price of their home, which was about a 1,200 square foot home, was somewhere in the neighborhoods of around $18,000 is what the house actually cost them when it went on for sale. I remember living in that house, and for the longest time, there was this one room in the house, which was the largest room in the house, and it was what was today would be the living room. But for many years, up until I became an early teenager, that room was completely empty. There was no furniture in it, and the reason being is because Mom and Daddy just absolutely couldn't afford any furniture to go in that room. That door stayed shut for the majority of my younger years growing up there. And I remember they kept it shut. In the wintertime, you would open that door, it would be ice cold in there. In the summertime, you would open it up and it would be burning up with heat. It's because they kept the air off. They didn't want to waste any money heating a room that we did not live in. It's odd that it would have the name living room, and we never ever got into it until I was probably 12 or 13 years old. So that was something that I remember real early about that. We just didn't have the monies to buy anything. I know that Mom, for the longest time, she worked at a factory not too far from the house. But then for some reason, and I don't know why, she left that job and came home to be a homemaker. And I don't know if it was because it was cheaper to be at the house than to drive back and forth to the job that she had. I just don't know the reasons for that.
It's because Robert was trouble. That's why. Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't old enough yet to be trouble, but it was on its way. But anyway, Dad worked at a factory not too far from the house. In fact, he came from that era that wherever you went to work at, that's where you're going to work at for the entirety of your life. And lo and behold, if he didn't buy a house, that was literally a half mile from the factory. So that's where he was planning on working. I can remember as a young child standing up in the kitchen with Mom every day, it seemed. She would be making brownies, and we would put them in a plastic wrap for Dad to take to work with him to sell at lunchtime for a nickel a piece. And I asked Mom, why are we doing this? And she said, well, it's helping pay the bills. Now, as a youngster, I didn't understand really what a bill was. I didn't understand the need for extra income. I thought we were living fine, because it's the only life I knew. But that is something that I remember vividly, standing up in the kitchen, fixing brownies, putting them into plastic wraps, and not being able to eat the first brownie. Because every brownie had to go with Dad to the factory to get the money coming in the house. I can remember that real well. I can remember being at the house, and the only piece of clothing that we would get new would be at Christmas time, and it would be very little for that. But the majority of the clothes that we got were basically hand-me-downs, or I should say for me, hand-me-overs from older cousins, because I didn't have an older brother to get any clothes from. But that's what we got as far as clothes were concerned. When it came to activities in school, I don't want to make this sound like, man, this guy's life was rough, because I really didn't have any idea it was rough. I just know that I never really participated in any after-school activities. Come to find out, the reason for that is because after-school activities cost money, and there was just no extra money to spare. So that's kind of what we did there in that case. I know that it was one day when I was standing up with Mom, I remember just turning to her, and I said, Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to be a millionaire. And I remember Mom turning and looking at me, and she said, really, why do you say that? And I said to her, well, because the Beverly Hillbillies. I watched the Beverly Hillbillies every day when I got home from school. I didn't know what a millionaire was. I had no concept of what it was, but here's what I knew. Jed was in a shack in the woods somewhere. He was out with his gun. He shot at the ground, and this black oil called Texas tea came out. And the next thing you know, old Jed's the millionaire. And he's moving the family to Beverly Hills, and they have this nice, large house. They have a concrete pond, and they seem to be enjoying living this new life. I was young enough, but yet mature enough at that time to recognize that things are tight. And there's things that my family just wouldn't do. Going out to eat like we do every day, today we can go out 2 times a day if we want to go outside and eat. Mom and Dad, if we went out to eat once every 2 months, it was a treat. I mean, it was a treat to go out and do that, but it was something very rare. So things like that have stayed with me forever. And all I knew was I did not want to live like that the entirety of my life. Not that it was a bad life. It was a great life coming up. But at the same time, it just seemed like you were constrained. And I did not want to live like that. That has stuck in my mind for the entirety of my life.
You mentioned that your dad worked at a factory. What was that factory, and what did he do?
The first factory was Utica Tool Company, which was right up the road from the house, and they made tools. They were, I guess, a competitor to Sears, the Castleman brand, but they made tools there for years and years and years. And Daddy would have worked there. He would have worked there until his dying day, except the factory closed down. So when he left there, he went and worked at various other companies, and then he finally ended up retiring from a company called International Paper in Eastover, South Carolina.
Before you were born, was he still working at that factory, or did he do anything before that?
I don't know. I know that Dad went into Navy when he and Mom first got together, and then he sometime along the way he got out, and they basically got married, and I guess I'm thinking that might have been his first job, as far as I know. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. All right. Well, moving forward, high school. What was high school like? How did that shape you and your drive and your ambitions going forward?
I am, no one is more surprised than me that I got out of high school. No one is more surprised. Going up to the 10th grade, I was doing pretty good in school, but something happened in the 11th grade. And basically, I decided I wanted to rebel against authority. So in the 11th and 12th grade, I went from a straight A student to barely getting out of high school student. So, and I don't say that to be bragging. I say that ashamedly. That is something that I did that I'm not proud of, and I'm glad you and your brother did not follow that path. But I would say that high school years were a very dangerous time for me, simply because I didn't have any leadership at the school. I didn't seek out any leadership. I never knew that a term called guidance counselor actually existed until after I graduated high school. I didn't know who they were. They probably knew who I was and didn't want anything to do with me. And frankly, looking back, I don't blame them one bit. I remember when I graduated, the night I graduated, we were at the Smith Hammond Auditorium on South Carolina State College campus. and that's where our graduation was held. And I remember that night when we graduated, walked outside, Mom and Dad was standing there, and I remember this feeling came over me that I had no idea what I was going to be doing the following Monday morning. I had done what I'd done in high school, and at that point in time, I was just there. And that's all. That was it. That was my ambition. I was just there.
You made a comment earlier that growing up, y'all didn't have money for extracurricular activities. You see all these studies and stuff about students who are, multi-sport athletes and stuff like that, how it impacts their livelihood, their grades, their school experience, stuff like that. Do you think high school would have been different for you if you played any sports? Because correct me if I'm wrong, you were pretty good at basketball, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could shoot the hoop. I could absolutely do that. Can't shoot it today worth 2 cents, but I could do it very well then. The answer to your question is yeah. In fact, I believe that so much. You recall that when you and your brother got old enough to drive, where most people might say, all right, it's time to go get a job, your mother and I had said, no, as long as you are playing sports, you don't have to worry about getting a job. We will pay whatever expenses you've got, if you recall that. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is because I recognize the value as I've gotten older of having a team of people that can encourage you and lead you forward and give you great insight on accountability, expectation, and everything that comes with the responsibility of being a team member. Those are things that I didn't learn coming up because I was left basically to go my own way, and I chose the wrong way as a youngster. We didn't want you nor your brother to make that same choice. So I absolutely think that things would have probably been different. In fact, I know they would have been had I actually got engaged in leadership like that and had found myself under the tutelage of coaches that actually put some interest and effort and care into, my life and everybody else's life that they had the opportunity to be coaches for.
For the audience, if you can't see it, I just pulled out my silver spoon, so that's why you can't see it. Okay. You
put it back.
You told me a story once. You and a buddy of yours were in high school, and you were not going to pass a class, and then a teacher asked you to do something. Will you tell everyone that story?
Oh, boy. So, Mr. Castleman, God rest his soul, was the economics teacher in class. And this is a great indication of my high school years. So Mr. Castleman, he was an Irish guy, I think, red hair. If you can just imagine that. The only thing that was missing was the little green outfit and a little green hat. But he taught economics. And it was very early in that particular semester whenever we were in his class. And I remember myself and a gentleman named Eddie. I won't say Eddie's last name to protect him from anything. But we were sitting in class one morning, and Mr. Castleman looked over at us and said, I'm hungry. If you two will go and get me a biscuit from Hardee's and bring it back to me, you won't have to come back to my class, and I'll give you a B for the semester. 20 minutes later, Mr. Castleman had his steak biscuit, and we never went back to that class.
Did you get a B?
I got a B.
It's the American education system for you. Good.
And I'm not proud of what I just said.
Good. Okay, so what's next? When did you go to college? When did you meet Mom? Did those happen around the same time, or are those two different time periods?
Yeah, if you recall when I said earlier that I, on the day that I graduated, the night that we graduated, actually, I stood there not having any idea what I was going to do that following Monday. Well, Dad told me, and this is why I said Dad. Dad told me that, son, you need to be an engineer. He told me, at the factory that I work at, the engineers are those who do very well. So not having any direction, but being given direction by my dad, I went and I took mechanical engineering. I got an associate's degree in mechanical engineering. I graduated not really knowing anything about engineering, even though I had the degree. It gave me things. I went through classes, I went through courses of things that absolutely did not interest me at all. And I did it simply because Dad said you need to be an engineer. And I remember whenever I did that and I graduated from there and I went and I interviewed for engineering jobs, no offense to engineers across America, but the couple of guys that I saw engineering me, I looked at them and I thought to myself, the lack of life in this interview right now, if this is what their life turns out to be after 30, 40 years of engineering, I didn't want anything to do with engineering. But you mentioned your mom. Where did I meet her? Mm-hmm. Well, at that same university, your mom came up to me one day, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I promise you, she walked up to me, and she walked past people to walk up to me, and as she got closer, I started thinking, is that pretty girl coming to me? And sure enough, she was. And I don't know what she said to me. All I know is she smiled. And when she smiled, that's all I could think about. She might have told me to go jump in a lake.
You're standing in my way.
You're standing in my way. Why are you at this place? It could have been anything. All I could hear was the birds singing, the violins playing in the background, and her smiling. That's all I can remember. And even though she and I did not really begin dating until probably 4 years after that, literally, that lady owned my heart from that very day. And she didn't even know it. I compared every girl that I ever dated to your mom. And I finally built up the nerve to start chasing her down. And once I got in a dogged pursuit of her, she wasn't going to get away. So she had two choices. Marry me or kill me. And I'm glad she chose marriage.
Okay, so y'all met, and then 4 years later or so, y'all started dating. Did you two have any sort of friendship or relationship or anything? Or
yeah, we'd see each other around. I mean, I would be dating different people. She'd be dating different people. We'd see each other around. So,
okay. Jumping from mom to some of the career stuff. You get married. You become a financial advisor. Is that before or after kids?
That was right at the same time.
At the same time.
Right at the same time.
What made you decide to leave what you were doing right around the same time of having kids to go in a completely different industry?
Well, I had a career event take place. After 13 years of dedicated work with a corporation, on a Tuesday morning, they fired me. They told me that the company was going in a direction and I did not fit into future plans.
Did you offer any of them steak biscuits?
No, maybe that would have changed things. But no, I remember that's what happened after 13 years of doing that. I remember coming home that day. Your mom was on the telephone because she had just left a company that she was working at because she and I had discussed it, and she was going to be a stay-at-home mom to raise you and your brother.
So Savannah Riverside, right?
Right. So I remember coming home that day. She was on the telephone, and she thought that I was coming home packing clothes to get on an airplane to fly someplace else. And I walked in the door and told her, I said, "Nah, I've been fired. I'm going to go take a nap. Wake me up in a couple hours." And I remember the look on her face. I think she hung up the phone without saying goodbye to who she was talking to. And when I woke up a couple hours later, she was sitting at the end of the bed staring at me, and she said, Did you really get fired? I said, yeah, I got fired. So when that happened, I had made a internal decision that I would never, ever put myself in a position to where someone could determine if I could put food on my table or not. And so that's when your mom and I were talking, and we recognized that I had developed a skill set along the way because I studied money. and I started studying how money worked and how money operated. And your mom had this idea. She said, people are coming to you getting advice and asking for advice. Why don't you see about doing this for a living? And I thought, that might be something I can try. And, for the last 30 years, we've been trying it.
What, you said along the way you were picking up stuff and you were studying. What were some of the things that caught your interest when it came into this realm? What was some of the stuff that you were studying that you enjoyed?
Well, I wanted to escape. You remember earlier when I mentioned that I didn't want to live the way that my upbringing was. I didn't want to have that. I didn't want to live that way. I didn't want that for my wife. I didn't want that for my children. I didn't want that for myself. So I had this internal drive to learn how to escape. At that company that I worked for, that I got terminated from, a very good thing took place in my life at that point in time. A gentleman in upper management named Roger, for whatever reason, took an interest in me. And he was well off. He was wealthy. And Roger began to talk to me about setting aside monies and how monies worked and how to save. And during that time, he would give me information to look at. He would give me thoughts to think about. He would give me verbal instruction on whether or not I'm doing something that is good for my future, or if I'm getting ready to do something that is going to not be beneficial for my future. Mm-hmm. So he did that, and I started putting that into practice. I will tell you that he said something to me back then that I still say to clients today. 401ks had just started coming out at that time, whenever I was working at that particular factory. And Roger had come to me and he said, you need to do this 401k. And I said, okay, what do I need to do? He said, do as much as you can stand. I said, well, I don't know how much that is. He said, well, start until you figure it out. And he said, start high. And if you need to go backwards, go backwards. But don't start low. He said, start high. And then he made this comment. He said to me, and make sure you're doing enough to get all of the free company match. Now, I will say this to you. I think I'm a pretty smart guy, but I'm not sure I would have figured that out on my own until I heard it. It's like when somebody turns on a light switch and you go, that makes all the sense in the world. So, I try to encourage every client that comes in this door to do their company 401k, and if their employer's matching 1%, 2%, 5%, 8%, whatever it is, do as much as you can to get all of that match. And I have found that right there has been probably some of the most beneficial information I've ever received in my life when it came to finances. And it's so doggone simple. Just participate. Just participate.
Okay. Jumping ahead a little bit. So now we're married. You're a financial advisor. The next step was you became a father. What was that like?
That was terrifying. I will tell you, that was absolutely terrifying. Your mom, bless her heart, she had no idea what she had gotten into when she said yes to me, when she said I do. I remember, to go back, I remember when I was getting ready to ask your mom to be my wife. I remember standing in Daddy's bathroom at the house, and I remember shaving, combing my hair, and Dad was in there, and I said, Daddy, I said, I'm gonna ask Linda to marry me. And I remember he was over there doing something. He kind of stopped. He said, uh-huh. And I said a couple other things. And I remember he said this to me as I'm going out to ask probably the most important question in my life that I've ever asked anybody. He says to me with the straightest face ever, what if she says no? And I thought to myself, I never thought about that.
That's good, Dad. Yeah, that's good.
I never thought about that. But later that night when I come home, oh, by the way, she did say yes. All right. So hopefully you figured that out yet. We hadn't been living in sin all these years. But when I got home that night, Dad had never waited up for me. I got home that night probably about 2 a.m. and Dad was sitting up at the table drinking a cup of coffee. And I remember when I walked in the door, I walked in, and all he said to me was, "Well, what did she say?" You remember how he talked. And I said, she said, "Yeah." Like, what do you think she was going to say? And I remember he took a swallow of coffee, he got up and went to bed. That's all he said. And I recognized later when I spoke at Dad's funeral, and I had shared with the people who were in the audience, I said to them, I said, when I was acknowledging my wife, I said, Daddy raised me up to as far as he could raise me. And then when Linda said yes, Daddy recognized that it was up to Linda to raise me the rest of the way. And so having children, your mama was raising me basically at the time. And then here I am being raised, and then I've got two boys that I'm going to be raising now. And so it was terrifying. But at the same time, it was the most rewarding thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I mean, it gave me a family. It gave me a family. I got the best wife I've ever had. I got one of two kids that I would say is pretty good. Your brother is fantastic. You, on the other hand, yeah, I don't know.
I'm going to put him in a home.
Yeah, you're out the inheritance.
All right, back up a little bit. There was another question. So, you got married and you made the comment, hey, Mom was raising me and the kids. What kind of impact do you think getting married had on your finances, but two, just you growing up, maturity, stuff like that?
Well, the impact came because I married the right person. A lot of times today people get married without really knowing who they're marrying. I knew who I was marrying in your mom. She knew exactly who she was marrying in me. We had made this pact that we had determined there was going to be this word that never, ever came in our house. And I won't say that word today, but that word begins with the letter D, and it involves a married couple going their separate ways. And your mom and I made this agreement that word would never, ever be breathed out of either one of our mouths. And so just having that commitment, one to the other, made a significant impact on our lives, because it didn't matter how bad we messed up. We were going to go down in that ship together if that ship was going to go down. If it was going to float, we were going to float in it, and if it was going down, we were going down. But we made that commitment. When the two of you came into the picture, that solidified it even further, because we recognized that if God had given you to your mom and I, then God expected us to do our responsibility and be parents. And you can't be parents if you're absent, and we weren't going to be absent.
You have brought up God a handful of times in this podcast. Where along the way did you meet the Lord?
Well, I was exposed to the Lord quite a bit all throughout my life. Again, I keep saying your mom. Your mom had a relationship with the Lord long before I did. In fact, your mom was the spiritual leader in our household for the longest time. After we were married, along the way, I finally surrendered. Your mom prayed long and hard enough to where God called, and I finally surrendered. And from that point forward, basically every decision that we make is based off of the biblical principles that His written word gives us. So in your mom and I, in our home, as you very well know, doing and saying in opposition of the written word of God is a non-negotiable. That's not going to happen. So it's come in. It's made a complete difference in our lives, and I can talk for hours and hours about that, but
we've only got 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I know we keep jumping around a little bit. So going forward again now, you're married, you've got Ethan, you've got me. You grew up, you already said the story, you grew up kind of in a poverty area where you were helping your parents wrap up brownies so that your dad could sell them for extra income. You've already said that you wanted to become a millionaire, albeit even if it is the
What's the word you're looking for?
what's the show?
The Beverly Hillbillies?
Beverly Hillbillies. I was going to say Hollywood Rednecks, and I was like, that is not the right word.
Hollywood Rednecks.
The Hollywood Rednecks.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. You might be on to something.
So you, in your mind, you see that and you think, okay, hey, they're wealthy. You know, I'm not gonna be in poverty. I don't know what I'm gonna be, but I know I'm gonna be a millionaire. So you growing up, or you being an adult, married with kids, having that thought process, what were some of the things that you tried to teach me and Ethan that you didn't necessarily get taught yourself?
Well, let me come back and say this about my not being taught. Mom and Dad, I think, found themselves pigeonholed in a predicament that they did not think they had the ability to get out of. They didn't have the connections. They didn't have the counsel. They didn't have the network of individuals to speak positively into their lives and to show them a way out. So they didn't know what they didn't know, I guess is the best way to say that. So in saying that, Mom and Dad never discussed money with me other than you need to save some money, put it in a CD. Now, as you and I very well know, CDs are good for a purpose, but they're certainly not good for providing income in retirement. So they never really had those conversations with me. The one thing I do know is that Mom and Dad did their best to live within their means. Mama especially. Mama could squeeze 3 cents out of a penny. All right. Daddy, given the opportunity, Daddy would spend that penny, but he'd have to go home to Mama. So more often than not, he didn't spend that penny. Well, what I took from that coming up with you and your brother, if you noticed, some of the people you went to school with might have had nice, shiny new cars. You and your brother had old, used vehicles. Reason for that is simply because one of the things that I learned very early on is appearances can be deceiving. And we didn't want you guys to get caught up in the materialism of keeping up with the Joneses or whoever you want to call them. But we didn't want you to do that. So we purposely made sure that we kept you guys level, that you didn't get a lot of silver spoon handouts, as you alluded to earlier at the beginning of the podcast, that you didn't get that. But what you did get is you got what you needed, not necessarily what you wanted. And then we put you two on the path that if you want to go get what you want, then you go get it. All right, we're not going to provide it. You go get it. Your mom and I always made certain that you and your brother never fell so far you couldn't get helped back up. But we would let you fall so you would learn to get back up. And that's what I got from Mom and Dad. I would say that we imparted on to you too. That if you fall, you got to learn to climb back up. Because one day we won't be here. And if we're not here, we can't reach out to give you a hand up. You got to learn to climb on your own eventually. But surround yourself with wise counsel.
Yep. So you became financial advisor, financial planner, and where did you start out at?
I'm not following you.
What firm were you working at when you first started in this industry?
There was a firm no longer exists today. They were bought out. A company called Waddell & Reed. Great company. I started working there and worked there for several years, over 20 years, and then of course after that some career choices came up, and I moved over to where we are now. When
you were at Waddell & Reed, let me back up. What caused you to go from working at Waddell and Reed to saying, I'm going to start the Templeton Group?
Changes in corporate mindsets, changes in the culture at Waddell and Reed. Not that they were wrong, just didn't fit where I felt I wanted to take my practice and how I wanted to service my clients. I wanted independence. I wanted the ability to be able to offer many products instead of just a selected line of products that were corporately determined for you in advance. Again, not that was wrong, because it works, but I wanted to be able to expand and go further. In addition to that, I wanted to be able to have an asset, a business that one day I could retire from and possibly sell. Of course, that was before you came aboard and decided you wanted to take over, and your mama told me I couldn't make you buy the business. So again,
Silver spoon.
Yeah, silver spoon. Yeah. So, but that's what I wanted. I wanted an entity that we could own that would also enable us to help our clients meet their objectives that they're trying to get.
All in all, would you say that it has been a good decision jumping over here and making the Templeton Group?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My only regret is I didn't do it sooner.
Well, Dad, I got to say, I'm very happy that you made the jump from Waddell and Reed over to the Templeton Group. I'm thankful that you have been able to build this thing, and I'm happy that I'm going to be the one that gets to take it. So from one son to his father, thank you for that. But that is all for today. Thank you all for joining us and being here for our very first My Father Said podcast. I will try and put some of your thoughts into action. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Robert.
And you've been listening to the My Father Said podcast, where we discuss things faith, finance, and family.
Thank you for spending your time with us today. We sincerely hope you found the content beneficial. We will produce our next episode soon, so be on the lookout for it.
In the meantime, you can find us on our website, templeton-cornerstonecolumbia.com, and also feel free to like and follow us on Facebook.
This has been a great show. I've enjoyed it. Some of the questions that you asked me, we can discuss off air. My father said, get out of here. See you next time.